We are joined by Air Vice Marshal retired Shehzad Chaudary, a defense analyst. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Indus News. Now, Mr. Chaudary, how heavily does this dream of regional connectivity in South Asia depend on the peace and stability of Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tipping point in Afghanistan at this time, strategically speaking, because a very long term of the foreign forces in Afghanistan is just about coming to an end. And that status quo, which had been imposed upon the region because of the foreign forces, is, of course, now changing. So that creates more opportunities and potential and promise for the region to turn the corner. Within Afghanistan, of course, the possibility of Afghans finding a new normal for themselves, creating a more better consensus for themselves, and laying out a future prospect which will hopefully give them peace as well as stability within Afghanistan, which will then, of course, begin to impact the region around. The region, of course, in the meanwhile, has also moved on. The introduction of CPEC in Pakistan, the BRI initiative, the fact that the Central Asian states are more keen to now open up and find routes to further trade or developing trade in the region as well as across the world. And of course, the possibility of Iran now coming out of a tight corner that the U.S. had placed it under because of heavy sanctions, if the U.S. and Iran can come to some agreement in terms of the nuclear issue. So all these are the possibilities which have created that tipping moment for the entire region. And therefore, this flurry of activity that you see at the level of leaderships in the region is essential and important. It indicates to what all could happen and promise. So, of course, Afghanistan is the central piece there, but around that, a lot more is happening, which could decide favorably in terms of the future prospect of the region.
Mr. Chaudary, so do you believe there is a possibility of suitable peace and stability in Afghanistan anytime soon, considering the number of spoilers?
Yeah, anytime soon is a difficult part there, because yes, as you mentioned, the number of spoilers. The region has been embroiled in a war for a very long time, and a lack of a central grid within Afghanistan meant that a lot of spoilers found foothold there, toeholds there. We popularly mention India there because of its presence in a huge way in Afghanistan, in the turmoil of Afghanistan, to try and impose a second front on Pakistan, which they had done in the last 20 years or so, 15 years. Now that became very evident, and of course India now openly says that Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa regions are the ones that are targeted by not only India, but of course the groups that are sponsored by India, especially Balochistan. And so therefore, yeah, that's been a hotbed of intrigue, of insurgency, of trouble for the region, especially Pakistan. Iran has been very threatened by how things have developed in Afghanistan. Central Asia has been, of course, not very settled, exactly for similar reasons. And so therefore, yes, that is true, that there are a number of spoilers, and it will take a while for any force that tends to dominate Afghanistan to overcome these hurdles and these groups and warlords that exist there. But hopefully, one prays and hopes, and one sees the possibility of more of a negotiated solution to the whole thing within Afghanistan, so that they do not have to enter a civil war proper to avoid, getting mired into another long war within Afghanistan. So therefore, if there can be a political consensus and a political way forward within Afghanistan, that will ease off a lot of pressure. And if there is a central authority that gets determined in Afghanistan or gets in place in Afghanistan, that will then hopefully enable a more stable or a relatively more stable Afghanistan, so that the rest of the world can find peace, and especially the region, which can then begin to develop a more longer-lasting relationship with Afghanistan.
All right, Mr. Chaudary, as we know, Pakistan was one of the first countries in the region that talked about the importance of regional connectivity. Other than the Afghan issue, what are the key initiatives needed to enhance the trade and transit conduits of the region?
Yeah, that's a very essential and an important point. Sometimes that's something that we miss entirely when we talk of the just one paradigm, but that is a security paradigm. I think the security paradigm of Afghanistan, while is the key to the whole thing, but it will need more than the security leverages to be able to resolve it. And what that really means is that you want to solve the security predicament of Afghanistan and the region. But the way to that solution is through the economic imperative. And the economic imperative lies in how China wants to develop in the region. It has its own loop, his own branches of the BRI and the CPEC, etc., and its own relationship with Kazakhstan and then Kyrgyzstan, etc. So they have their linkages, but here they are enabling their own trade as well as the region to get interconnected with all these connectivities that they are trying to create. So I think that is the key. If we can somehow tailor the direction of this entire process of trying to find a solution, a regional solution, into a more economic model, which was possibly talked of yesterday between the Prime Minister of Pakistan and the President of Uzbekistan, into seeing how Iran, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and then the larger China, Russia connectivity can also feed into this. I think this will then force the nations to look at the security paradigm in a different context. So my theory has generally been that the way out of the security paradigm is through the key of economic connectivity and economic prospects, and that is where the leaders must focus, because Afghanistan too will need to find its own means of sustenance, economic and financial, and therefore it will need to also have an economy developed around what goes around for trade in the region and in the between the rest of the countries. I think that is what is going to help them try and find better stability and security.
Mr. Shehzad Chaudary, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Indus News.